In this video, we're going to look at the sections on the exam, the format of the questions in each section, the content you'll need to revise for each section, and we'll have a look at some of AQA's online resources that we can use for our revision. So the first thing you're going to look at is the cover sheet of the actual exam, and it tells you here that you need a calculator and a protractor. You're going to write in black, and you have to answer all of the questions on the paper. There are no optional questions. So the paper is broken down into three sections. You've got section A, core technical principles, which is 20 marks. Section B, which is specialist technical principles for 30 marks. And section C, which is designing and making principles for 50 marks. So 100 marks on the entire paper over the 2 hours. So section A is really broad, covers lots and lots of stuff. But if we want to revise for it and create a checklist or anything like that, we can go to pages 9 to 19 of the course specification. Specifications available on AQA's website. So we'll follow the link here. It brings us to this page. So GCSE Design Technology, AQA, if you Google that, it'll take you here. And as long as this code says 8552, you're on the right course. And down the page on the left-hand side is the specification. It's a PDF. If we open up the PDF, I can then scroll down to page 9. Core technical principles, subject content. And here it is in a sort of list format, which you can work through. So that's the content for section A. If we look at the questions, there's 10 marks of multiple choice questions to start off with. So it's a nice little warm-up. These marks aren't marked by a human. It's done by a computer. So we have to fill in these parts properly by following the guidance in the box, which is on the exam paper. You need to shade in the lozenge for the correct answer. If you change your mind, you put a cross through it and shade in another one. If you change your mind again, you circle the one with a cross through it that you think is correct. So here's one of the 1 mark multiple choice questions. Which of the following is a composite material? And I'd expect you to know the answer to this, but if you're unsure, it's A, carbon fiber reinforced plastic. So it's carbon fibers cast in epoxy or polyester resin to create a really rigid, strong, but lightweight material. It should be used in sports cars, bicycles, tennis rackets, and hockey sticks and such like. Once you finish the multiple choice questions, you'll move on to short written answers. Sometimes they're 4 marks, but here are some typical questions here, which are 1 mark and a 2 mark question. So here's one, name one alloy. So an alloy is a combination of 2 or more metals. So an example of an alloy might be brass, which is copper and zinc. Why would you combine copper and zinc to make brass? Well, we take the properties of copper and the properties of zinc and combine them to create a superior material. So if you think about the particular application, the properties that you require, and essentially you get the ingredients for the properties from each of those metals and combine them to make a new one. So section B, so the second part of the paper, is specialist technical principles. The really important thing here is that you actually answer the questions relating to the materials you've been over in your course. So for us, that's polymers and timbers. Don't be tempted to answer the question in relation to textiles, paper and board and such like. Whilst you think you might know the answers, it's very unlikely that you'll have the technical understanding to get close to 4 marks on those questions. So stick to polymers and timbers. Again, on the course specification, we can go to pages 19 to 28 to have a look at the content that's required. And I've dropped a couple of screenshots here just to explain it a little bit to you. So this is an overview of section B content. And then if you go to the detailed section, so 3 to 9, which is surface treatments and finishes, they all say this in relation to at least one material category or system. So when it says at least one, it's talking about the polymers or timbers. So in the case of surface treatments and finishes, it's surface and treatments and finishes for polymers or timbers. So if it was timbers, you'd be talking about things like waxes, varnishes, and so on. They would be your surface treatments and finishes. Okay. So here's a typical question from section B. So choose one commercial process from the table below. So it gives you 6 options. Again, this is where you need to pick the polymer or timber option. So polymer extrusion would be the obvious answer for us, or wood turning. So using a wood lathe, that's wood turning, would be the other option. So polymer extrusion, we write that in the space here. Name a specific main material used in this process. So I know that PVC pipe is extruded. So main material, PVC. Name the stock form of material used in your chosen process. So what form do we buy the material in before we extrude it? And the answer for that is powder or granules, and they go into the feed hopper of the machine. So powder or granules, that's your stock form. Give 2 reasons that make your chosen process suitable for the commercial manufacture or for commercial manufacture. Essentially, this is saying what are the advantages to extrusion. They are that it's very accurate, it's very consistent, high tolerances, so they're always repeatable shapes and forms as they force through the die. It's efficient, there's very little waste. So we can go through that, but there's 4 marks there for each of those reasons. Okay. The 2022 exam paper had one of these questions on it, which I quite like, but it wasn't, and they're popular, they come up quite often. And these ask you to use notes and or diagrams to describe a process in detail. So you need to choose one of these processes out of these 4 here, and start to explain it using notes and diagrams in the space below. So for us, we'd either choose turning or laser cutting. In terms of turning, it'd be wood turning. In laser cutting, it would be laser cutting wood or acrylic. So the wood that we would choose would be MDF or plywood. But what you need to think about with your revision, so it's a 5-mark question, is how would you explain the processes that you've been given in your specialist technical knowledge? How would you explain them using notes and or diagrams? So that's something to revise. So if we chose the polymer option, we'd be looking at extrusion, blow molding, injection molding, and vacuum forming. So another question to look at in section B would be the 8-mark question. We don't know the content really that's going to come up for this, but we just know there's going to be an 8-marker in there. It's going to be on section B, and it could come from any of the things that were on this list here. So this one was about environmental issues, and this is about the life cycle of a product and its environmental impact. So if we read the question, we might think, how would we answer this question? It's an 8-marker. So you need strategy, you need to think about how you're going to approach it. But in terms of revision, you might find it useful to look at the mark scheme. So this is question 18 of the 2022 paper. So let's go back to the AQA website. Before we were looking at the specification page. If we move over to the assessment resources page, we can go down, and here are some of the exam papers. So there's a 22 exam paper, 23 exam paper, 22 mark scheme, 23 mark scheme. Then you've got your filter thing on the left-hand side here. So if I go into the 2022 mark scheme, and here it is. It was question 18. Scroll down to question 18. The top of question 18, you get descriptors for the mark bands, but what you might find really useful is this indicative content. This isn't the exact content that you need for the marks, but it's what they're suggesting they would be expecting you to write down in those sections. So it's not an exhaustive list, but it's useful for revision. And it's talking about the life cycle of the product in the question, so it's broken down into 5 sections for here. So we've got raw material extraction, transport, packaging, shipping and distribution, product use and operation, and end-of-life disposal. And then it's got some suggested content for that question there. So we go back to this. Carbon dioxide is released as a result of making, transporting, and using product during its lifetime. This is called carbon footprint. Analyze and evaluate what factors contribute to carbon release or carbon footprint from raw material source to final disposal. So that's your life cycle analysis. You can break it down into 5 sections for 8 marks, 2 marks for each section. That means 10 marks. So it could be a 10-mark question, all the way from raw material through to disposal. So we contextualize this thinking about our specialist knowledge. We talk about polymers. Polymers comes from crude oil. It's fractional distillation. If we go to extrusion, it's converted to a stock form, and then we extrude it. And then it's converted to PVC pipe from the extrusion. Then it's distributed and transported. Then it's put on shelves, and it's used in a product, and then it fails at some point in its life, and then it ends up in landfill or recycled. You can discuss that in detail and get 8 marks quite comfortably there. But the point I'm making here is you can look at the mark scheme to help you with your revision, and there's those papers on the AQA website. Okay, so section C, designing and making principles. Again, if you look at the course specification, it's pages 28 to 35, and there's another screenshot of that section. So this is like an overview, and each of these bullet points on here will have a bit more of a detailed description within the course specification. We're just going to have a look at some topics that often come up on the section C of the exam. Can't guarantee they'll definitely come up this year, but they have come up previously quite consistently. Okay. So there's a product analysis question, usually worth 12 marks, but it's a 12 marker that's broken down. In this case, it's broken down into 2 6 markers. In the past, they've also broken it down into 3 4 markers, so 12 marks in total. They'll give you an example of a product and then ask you to analyze it. So these questions are often not about what you know, but more about thinking in the exam about the products you're given, because they tell you here or what the properties and advantages to each of these products are. So you just need to start discussing using your technical vocabulary, technical understanding, the suitability in this case for the user, and then the ergonomics and anthropometrics here. Okay. Ergonomics and anthropometrics often come up on this question. Another one that often comes up is communication of design ideas. So, that's the formal drawing techniques that you'll have been through. This screenshot is the stuff from the AQA specification, but these are the examples that I've got here. So orthographic drawings often comes up, exploded isometric drawing, and 2-point perspective. So those are things worth practicing in your revision. This question here is an orthographic drawing, but it's a partially complete orthographic drawing. So what you need to do is finish the actual drawing, add the lines that are missing. So name the drawing, which is an orthographic drawing, complete the drawing, 4 marks, so add the lines that are missing. So you have to kind of work out where the lines would be based on these 2 views here. The one on the right-hand side here is an isometric exploded view. You've got an isometric grid there, and it wants you to add these components to the drawing in an isometric, in an exploded view. So the blade here would be elevated vertically above, and the screw above that on the grid in relation to where they would seat on the actual pencil sharpener. Work of others often comes up. It didn't in 2024, but it's a popular topic. So if you look at the course specification, they give you a really long list of potential people that you could look at, and it's too big a list really, but if the bit that you need to pay attention to are these sentences here. Okay, these sentences talk about, so these sentences are asking or telling you to choose 2 or more of these designers, and the same here, 2 or more of these brands. So in our case, we've looked at Ettore Sottsass and Philip Stark, and then for brands, we've looked at Alessi, Dyson, and Apple. So I'll make some more videos looking at the work of others in more detail. I'll also look at section B for polymers in detail as well. But that's your list there. So if you were thinking about revising, you'd revise Ettore Sottsass, Philip Stark, Alessi, Dyson, and Apple using your revision guide. So the last thing to talk about is the maths questions. The maths questions are spread out through the entire paper. Sometimes they're multiple choice questions at the start. Sometimes they're like 4 or 5 markers asking you to work out in volumes and areas and such like. It's a difficult one for me to say this is exactly what you need to revise, and the course specification isn't particularly helpful. But if you've got the Collins revision guide, the link I'll put in the description for this is off Amazon, this link here. You can buy one off Amazon, but in there it's a bit more helpful. On pages 6 to 7, there's an overview of the maths content you need to revise, and then there are some practice questions at the back. So pages 164 to 220 have all sorts of questions in there. They're not just the maths ones, but there are some maths ones there. Another resource that's really useful is the technologystudent.com website, and there's a mathematics section or mathematics and design technology section on there. Also worth looking at and spending some time going through there. Again, things like area, volume, and conversion in there that you're worth spending some time on. So good luck with the exam. Look out for some videos I'm going to produce next, which will be section B, polymers, and then we'll do some section C stuff on the work of others, environmental issues, and topics that repeatedly come up. We'll spend a bit more time on those. So good luck. Thank you for listening.